Amen. You may be seated. I'm so glad that you guys are here this morning. I do want to just give you a little bit of a heads up. I am fighting a cold. And so if you don't see me wandering around after the service and you didn't see me before, it's not because I'm mad at you. I'm just trying to keep my germs to myself because I'm pretty convinced that one of you came sick last week and gave this to me. And so I'm just trying to, stop the cycle. So anyway, but we are glad that you're here this morning. And honestly, we're in the middle of this series, which is, it's really a delicate series because we're talking about being rich. And our tagline in this is that we're learning to be generous with what God gave us. And anytime that we talk about money and personal finance and generosity and those types of things, it gets really, really personal. And because it gets really, really personal, a lot of people don't like to hear it. And a lot of pastors, and really kind of myself included in that, we don't necessarily like to talk about it either. But it's one of those things that's necessary as we keep following Jesus. Because there are certain things that Jesus has told us in the Scriptures. There are certain things that He has commanded us that we should be doing. There are certain things that He has shown us and modeled for us in this area of being rich and generosity and giving and those types of things. That's part of, as a follower of Jesus, that's part of who we should be in our life. And so that's where we are in this series. And I hope that you'll hang in there with us. Don't tune me out because you know we're talking about money or finances and you don't think that this necessarily applies to you, because the truth of it is it applies to all of us. You see, it's about 20 years ago, about 19 years ago really, that I had moved home. It was right before I had gotten married, so it was about 19 and a half years ago, right before I got married. And I moved home, and I would be out for a walk, and my mom and I would actually walk together from time to time, and she was like a speed walker back then, and I could hardly keep up, and I could do that type of stuff. But we would walk, and it got me into some conversations and thinking. I was on a bit of a break. I had been working on my master's degree, and I was tired of school, so I moved home and all of that kind of stuff. But I knew that God had called me into ministry. I knew that God had He had been stirring this thing in my heart, and I didn't know what it would lead to. I didn't know what it would become, and I didn't know that it would necessarily be this church at this time and all of that type of stuff. But I believed at some point in the future there would be a church that I would pastor, and I would stand before a group of people much like I stand before you today. And at some point I would have to talk about this area of money, of which I was a horrible manager of my money. I don't know if any of that applies to any of you, but a horrible manager of my money. In fact, so much so that I really had never developed the discipline of giving back to the Lord. I just had never developed it. For whatever reason, I don't necessarily recall, hearing messages in churches growing up where we talked about it a whole lot. I had one pastor for a little while that I remember him talking about money, but very legalistic in terms of his approach and some things like that. But I knew at that point, after just being in some conversations with my mom, that God was teaching me that there were some things that I had to deal with in my life before I could take a next step in terms of ministry, and a next step moving forward. Fast forward a few months, and Carrie and I, my wife, got married in August, and we learned actually really early on in our marriage that we were going to give back to the Lord a portion of our income. And it's one of those habits that we developed very early on, even though prior to that I really had not developed that habit. But she obviously she manages our money. She still manages our money because I'm not good at it. And so we set that aside and we give back to the Lord, and we've done that for 19 years. And I want to say this, and I'll tell you a little bit of the story. I'm not telling you these things to pat myself on the back. I'm telling you these things because we have seen God do some incredible things as a result of just our faithfulness to say, okay, God, we want to give back in proportion to the way that you have given to us. And we've seen God we've seen him multiply when we didn't have anything. We've seen him provide when we thought that, man, there's just no way. And it's been a lot of fun. It's been a great journey. In fact, so much so that I'm not sure that you today could convince me to stop giving. I don't think you could convince me of it because I've seen God's faithfulness too much over the last 19 years. in my life. You see, the truth of it is, when we think of money, most of us do, 5 different things with our money. And it looks like this, 5 different things with our money. The first thing that we will do is we'll spend it. You know that? How many are with me? Yeah. Most of us just are thinking through, like, I get paid on Friday, and I want to go, and I'm going to spend my money as soon as I get it. So you're going out to dinner through the weekend, and you get to the next week, and it's Wednesday, and all of a sudden you don't have any money, and it's because you spent it all before you get paid again. And you and I both know we've probably lived part of that in our life. We've gotten to this place where we've done that, and we know of other people who are struggling with that. In fact, one of the most fascinating things to me right now is I know of 2 different places, and there might be more in Bluffton, but I know of 2 places in particular that you can actually get paid right after you work a shift. So that you can go work 4 or 5 hours, and maybe it's the very next day that you get paid. I'm not 100% sure of how it works, but basically it's almost that you get paid immediately for the work that you accomplished. And you know what that says to me is those are people that basically are just going to spend their money as soon as they get it. They're spenders, right? So that's the first thing. Next thing that a lot of people do with their money is they repay debt. The reason that they're repaying debt is because for whatever reason, they have decided that they're going to borrow money in order to get some of the things that they want. We'll do things with that. We'll get debt because of a house that we want to buy or a car that we want to get, those types of things. But then we also go into some credit card debt because there's things that happen and we want this and that, and so we're not willing to wait, and so we wind up in debt. So then we just wind up repaying that debt, and we're looking at it, we get this minimum balance and all that kind of stuff, or minimum payment, trying to figure it out. But that's usually the second thing that people are doing with their money. The third thing people are doing with their money is they're paying taxes. And this is one of the things that we all grumble about the most, by the way. I don't know if you hear people grumble about taxes. For one, I think it's okay for us to pay taxes. We live in a great country. We have so many freedoms that we enjoy, and honestly, you couldn't enjoy all those freedoms if you didn't pay some of the taxes you pay. Right? So the next time you start thinking about that, I'd love to introduce you to some people I know, like in Haiti and Costa Rica and some other places that I know where they pay taxes and they don't get anything in return for it. So just throwing that out there, just free for come of the day. Pay taxes. Number 4 that some people do is they save it. They save it. Now, you may be one of those people, you're a saver. I know there was a guy in the first service, and I know like he's a saver, and it drives his wife crazy. She can't buy anything, all that kind of stuff. And so some people save it. But then the last thing that most of us think about is to give it. This is usually the order in which we handle our finances. In fact, so much so that for a lot of us, we get to the end and we realize, especially if you're one who spends it quickly, you get to the end of it all and there's nothing left to give. So how in the world are you going to be obedient to what Jesus tells you to do if you've gone through all this and there's nothing left at the end of it all? And we're going to talk about that as we go through this morning. It's interesting because Jesus actually talked about money. He talked about giving actually quite often when you look at the scriptures. It's not something that he shied away from. It's something that he would put out there very freely and just said, here, this is what it should look like for you in your life. And so one of those places that you're probably familiar with is in Matthew chapter 6. So if you have a copy of God's Word, turn to Matthew 6. We're going to pick up in verse 19. Just go through a few verses and then have some other places that we'll turn to this morning. But this is really key for you in this area of finances, in this area of giving, this area of generosity. And the way that Jesus starts talking about this, and this is a big passage where he addresses a lot of different things, but right here in the middle, he's talking about this idea of money, right? And he says this. He says, don't store up treasures here on earth where moths eat them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. And so he's basically saying, look, there's 3 things that are going to happen. If you store up treasures here in this world, you got 3 things that are basically going to happen. They're going to be eaten by moths, which I don't know that we necessarily worry as much about that anymore, but you're going to have rust that destroys them, or maybe in our day and language, we might just say they're just going to break. Or thieves are going to break in and steal them. Like, those are basically the things that happen. In fact, so much so, I wonder how many of us actually have things in our possession that we've had for like 5, 10, 15, 20 years. In fact, I've got a little running joke in my house because there's really about one thing that I have from what it's called BK, and it means before Carrie. I have one thing in my possession that I have before I got married, and I'm not even sure. I think she may have thrown it away as we moved recently, so I'm not even sure I have that anymore. But we don't keep a lot of stuff for a really long time. We're trading up and we're moving up and all that kind of stuff. But these are the things that's happening to most of our possessions. And this is what Jesus is saying. Look, most of us are going to store up treasures in one of two places. It's going to be here in this world, and this is what's going to happen to them, right? Or he says this. He says, you could store up, next verse, he could store up treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. And basically the invitation is this for those of us who follow Jesus. Now listen, if you don't follow Jesus, you don't have to pay any attention to this. You don't have to. This is not for you. But if you are a follower of Jesus, if you've said, hey, you know what, I've chosen to believe in and follow him, then guess what? Jesus is talking to you. These are red letters in the Bible, right? So one of two choices. You can store up things and treasures in this earth where all of those things are going to happen. Or you can store up treasures in heaven. You can decide that you are going to leverage, right, the things that you've been given. And you can make an impact in this world in such a way that your treasures actually wind up being in heaven. And by the way, this means that you are choosing to leverage your things to see people come to faith in Jesus. That's what you wind up wanting to give towards. Hey, I want to give towards helping people come find faith in Jesus. I want to store up treasures in heaven where the moth is not going to eat it, and the rust is not going to destroy it, and the thieves do not break in and steal. Several years ago, I lived back in, way before Y2K. You remember that? Way before Y2K, yeah? Some of you are like, Y2K? What's that? I don't know what that is. But I lived with a friend of mine. I actually had gone to college with him, and he and I were living in Wake Forest, North Carolina. And we were living in this house, and we both were serving at a church. And so our habits were pretty much the same. So every Sunday we were basically out of the house all day, and then Wednesday nights we both had responsibilities at the church, and so we would be gone on Wednesday nights. We came home one Wednesday night only to discover that there were some things missing in our house. And it all started that it was all my stuff. That's what we started noticing. Like there was a radio that was missing, and there was a couple other things that were gone. And then you look, and my checkbook was missing. I didn't have any money in it, but somebody took the checkbook. And so we called the police. The police came, and they wound up doing all the fingerprint dusting and all that kind of stuff, and trying to figure some things out. My roommate at the time, he thought it was kind of funny because as he initially looked around, he thought, man, all of your stuff is the stuff that got stolen. It doesn't seem like anything of mine was taken. And I didn't have anything super valuable. However, then he started to look for things that he had in the house but he didn't really use. He had this really nice camera, and only to discover that the person had dug in the closet and taken his camera. He had a really nice knife collection from his grandfather, and the person had stolen the knife collection from his grandfather. And all that just to share with you, like those are the things that we look at a lot of times, and we treasure and we find value in those things. And all it takes is a moment for someone to break in and steal those things. Now, good news if you just want to know, the person that actually broke into our home at that time actually got caught. The bad news is we didn't get any of our stuff back. So it's just interesting, though, when you think about it. What are the things, like if someone broke into your home right now, what are the things that you would say are the most valuable that you would be sad if someone took them? And what Jesus is trying to say to us in this is, look, there's a lot of things that you find value in this world, but I want you to start thinking about what can you find value in and place value in what's in this life that's to come. And let's start living towards that. Let's start living towards eternity and not so much in this moment. Let's flip the script a little bit. Let's think about how do we live differently than the rest of the world. Because he says this, verse 21. He goes, wherever, and you've probably heard it said, wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. Basically, it means this. If you're going to fill in the blanks, this is going to be your fill in the blank. Your financial priorities will reveal the condition of your heart. Your financial priorities, those things that you have determined to be the most important, those things in terms of your finances that have risen to the top. If you're one of those people, and those 5 things showed up on the screen a little bit ago, and you're someone who spends it, right? And then you're paying debt, and then you're paying taxes, and then maybe you're saving a little for yourself, and then you decide to give. Those types of priorities, if that's the order for you, then it's revealing the condition of your heart. Now, one of the things that we know about Jesus is he went right after it with people. He didn't really mix words. He just said, look, I just want to tell you this. This is what it looks like in your life. That where your treasure is, here in this world or in eternity, wherever you decide to place your treasure, however you decide to live for, whatever you decide to live for, all of those types of things, he's going, it will reveal the condition of your heart. So your financial priorities, and you've heard it said, you've probably heard some pastors talk about, if you were to open up your checkbook register, and not that anybody has those things anymore, but, if you have a checkbook register, or if you got your QuickBooks or your Excel spreadsheet, or however it is that you track finances, and you may just go, you know what, I don't really even do that because I have online banking, and I can pull it up right now, and I can see it. But basically, the way that pastors used to talk about it is that if you will look through what you've been spending your money on, it will reveal where your treasure is. And if in your list of ways that you are spending your money, there's nothing in there that says that you are giving a portion back to the Lord, then that's going to reveal the condition of your heart. And that's one of those things that makes us squirm, and it makes us feel a little uncomfortable, and you might think I'm meddling in your business, and I think that Jesus is meddling in my business when he talks about this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, Jesus is just spot on. And what I have found in my life is that so many of us are struggling in this particular area because we have not established the right financial priorities for us, and they are revealing the condition of your heart. By the condition of your heart, I mean it winds up really showing that we are incredibly selfish people. When we choose not to give back to the Lord a portion of what he has given to us, it just simply reveals that we are very selfish, we are very self-centered, and we're not willing to look and go, I want to store up my treasure somewhere else. In fact, Jesus is going to give us a little example in verse 22. He says this. He says, your eye is a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is good, your whole body is filled with light. And you think about that, gives light to the body. But when your eye is bad, and I don't know if you've ever dealt with your eye being bad. Has anybody ever had something that's stuck in their eye or something that's in there and it just gets irritated and red and all that kind of stuff? But when your eye is bad, he says this, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, and basically what he's showing us in this, right, is with a lot of people, what they think is the right thing to do. And that's where he's going. And if the light you think you have, the pursuit that you think you are on right now, and you are going, I think I have this figured out, right? And I think this is right, and I'm amassing this personal profile, and I've got the house that I've wanted, I've got the car I've wanted, and I've got all of these types of things, and I'm able to do these types of trips and go to these types of places. But Jesus is going, no. What happens with that is that this light that we think we have is actually darkness. And then he goes, how deep that darkness is. Meaning this, that we are blinded. We are blinded because of the pursuit that we're choosing in this world. And Jesus is just simply inviting us to something different. And you've probably heard this next verse. I'm sure you have. No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. And just real simply, you've probably heard that last sentence more than the others maybe. You cannot serve both God and money. To which I'm pretty sure that some of us in the room have just kind of said, you know what? Watch me try. And some of you are trying to live life that way. You're going, you know what, I get it and I've heard it, but I'm still convinced that I can pursue this. I can pursue this and I can still store up treasures in heaven. I can still store up all the treasures I want on earth, but then I can store up treasures in heaven. But the truth of it is you can't do that. You will run into problems somewhere along the way. And here it is. Your financial, if you're going to fill in the blanks, your financial priorities reveal your spiritual priorities. Your financial priorities and how you handle your finances, they reveal your spiritual priorities. And here's what it looks like, right? So you might be in the room and you might say, I love God. You might even quote that Matthew 22:37 that says, I love the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, and mind. And if you want to take the Gospel of Mark, you throw in strength. But the truth of it is, here it is. The truth of it is, if you don't give back to him financially, if you don't write some kind of a check back to him, then you can't say that you love him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Because Jesus told us, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And if you've said, I'm not willing to give back to the Lord, then you're basically saying, my treasure is somewhere else, which means my heart is somewhere else, which means it is showing where your spiritual priorities lie. That's where they lie. So if your financial priorities, on the other hand, if you're saying, listen, I want to demonstrate that I love the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, I'm going to set my financial priorities in order by what he has taught me. We're actually going to talk a little bit more about that next week. By what he has taught me to do, then you can say it might begin to align with what you would say are your spiritual priorities. And if you sit here, by the way, if you're sitting here and you're going, what right does he have to tell me these things? I really don't have any other than the Bible said it. Other than Jesus said it. And if you are going to say that you're going to follow Jesus, then your financial priorities and your spiritual priorities, in order for them to align, in order for you to say, I do love the Lord my God, somewhere your finances have to line up and you have to manage them and you have to steward them the way that Jesus told us that we should. Otherwise, they don't align. And otherwise, while you may aspire to that, that's not how you're living your life. And so you have to make a decision to say, I want to do it God's way, which is establishing those financial priorities. And that will speak to the spiritual priorities in my life. Now, understanding that that's true, the question becomes, how do I make a change? How do I make a decision to say, you know what, I need to do what Jesus said. I need to establish some financial priorities that align with the scriptures in order for that to actually speak to the spiritual priorities that I have in my life. So what do I do? And so I want to give you 3 things real quick in this. Okay, ready? 3 things. So what do you do? First, you need to maintain a proper perspective. And here's what it looks like. A proper perspective is one that comes from James 1:17. In the book of James, he simply says this: whatever is good and perfect is a gift coming down to us from God our Father, who created all the lights in the heavens. He never changes or casts a shifting shadow. And you might go, well, what do you mean by that? Here's what he means. He means this: everything that you have, everything that you've been given, every ability, that you have is from God. It's from him. So you can't go, well, this is my money and I made it with my ability to do this and that and the other thing. And I will say, no. God gave you that ability. God blessed you with that intellect. God allowed that for you. So basically the perspective is for you to understand that everything that you have, all of the wealth that you may have amassed in this world, the house that you live in, the car that you drive, the balance in the bank account, your 401k, it is all from your Heavenly Father. And by the way, He can take it away from you at any moment. But it's about a perspective going, you know what? I'm going to acknowledge that God has given me these things. Not only has He given me these things, but He has entrusted them into my care. And that's the whole parable of the talents and stewardship in Matthew 25 that he talks about later in the Gospel of Matthew. But it's the idea of what are you going to do with what you've been given? How are you going to leverage them for the kingdom and for kingdom purposes? And it starts by maintaining the right perspective. It's not mine, it's His. I didn't earn it, He gave it. And when you begin to change that perspective, it allows you to maybe loosen the grip just a little bit more of those things that you've been given. So that's number one. Number two, you need to establish new priorities. Establish new priorities. And I just repeat Matthew 6:21, right? So wherever your treasure is, that's what he said, wherever your treasure is, basically, that's where your heart is. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. And so you have to begin to establish some new priorities. If you're one who doesn't give anything, then I would encourage you, you need to start giving something. And I'm not asking you to give, 90% of your income. I'm not even telling you to give 10%. Some people would stand up here and say you have to give 10%. I just want to say, look, why don't you start somewhere? Why don't you start by establishing some kind of priority to say, I'm going to start giving. And the way that I've described it for a lot of years is that you're going to learn to give systematically and sacrificially back to the Lord. Somehow, some way, you're going to figure it out. For some of you, systematically and sacrificially is going to be $20 a week. For some of you, it might be $100 a week. For some of you, it might be $1,000 a week. I don't have any idea what that is for you. I can't answer that question for you. I can just simply say, you and I, if we want to be obedient to what Jesus is telling us to do, then we need to establish some new priorities in this area of giving. And by the way, this is one of the easiest things to do with automated giving and all that kind of stuff now. But I want to share with you, Marge Ruggles is right here in the middle of this middle section. Marge, this is a quote. I don't know if you remember giving me this quote years ago, but Marge said this. She and her husband Harvey, how many years were you and Harvey married? 63 years. I was way off in that first service. That's awesome. Harvey passed away a few years ago, but this is a quote that Marge gave me, and I love this. I've kept this, and I just think it's just a great demonstration of a couple that established a new priority when they got married. They said this: every month, Harvey and I wrote the first check on the first of the month to the Lord. And they did that 63 years. They just kept doing that. Why? Because they established it as a priority for them in their marriage and in their life. And I believe she told me that one Sunday after I had preached about money, by the way. But it's just encouraging to know, if you want to start somewhere, just start. Write a check every month back to the Lord. If you get paid every week, then write a check every week. If you get paid twice a month, write a check twice a month. I'm not telling you the formula. I'm just saying you've got to figure some way out to start giving and develop a new pattern and a new habit and establish a new priority for you in your life. Because here's why. Your life should look different. You see, most people are spending and they're paying back debt and they're paying taxes. And this is how we should be living. Number one, we should learn to give. That should be our priority. And specifically, give back to the Lord. We are honoring Him, right, from our wealth, from the ways that He has blessed us. We are honoring Him by giving back to Him. That's number one. Number two, we should learn to save. Now, if you want to put percentages to this, you can do 10%, 10%, and then you can live on 80%, right? And you can live on that. Or you can, if it helps you right now because you haven't quite figured it out, you haven't been real good at managing and stewarding your finances yet, you can do 5%, 5%, and my math was bad in the first service, so I said you can still live on 80%. You just lost 10%. Which is probably true of a lot of us. It's just there, you know. But learning to say, hey, I'm going to give, I'm going to learn to save, and I'm going to learn to live on what's left. This is one way that you can establish new priorities. And then the last one, number 3, is that you would become disciplined. This is a word for me in my life right now where I realized this is something that God gives us. This idea, this thing of discipline. He will give it to us. Give it to us. Just right there. In fact, he tells, when Paul is writing this letter to Timothy, he talks about Timothy, having self-discipline in his life. And you can become a disciplined person as you lean into the power of the Holy Spirit in your life and you're asking God for it. You can become disciplined in this area of personal finance in a way that you can say, you know what, I'm going to keep going. You see, historically what will happen is we'll talk about finances and then for about 4 or 5 or 6 weeks or maybe even 2 weeks, I don't even know. But, everybody starts going, okay, I'm going to give it. But then something happens and we stop and we haven't really developed the discipline of staying with it. And this is actually what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. He says this, now, hear my advice. It would be good for you to finish what you started a year ago. To which we all say, yes. Last year, you were the first who wanted to give, and you were the first to begin doing it. And he basically, he's saying, don't stop. Don't quit when it just begins to get hard, right? He goes on, now you should finish what you started. Let the eagerness you showed in the beginning be matched now by your giving. Give in proportion to what you have. So be disciplined. And I just want to share this little story with you. So I told you in my life that, Carrie and I kind of walked through this path and we really started giving early on in our marriage. And we've really, continued to do that through our marriage. And, there are some times where, God was blessing and I was in business before I was in ministry and we were able to give more, and then I stepped into ministry and my income got cut in half and we couldn't give what we were giving before, but we still maintained that we must give. And so we did, and we saw God provide in so many miraculous ways in that season early on in ministry, early on. And interestingly enough, recently, as we've continued to give, and every year about this time of year, she and I usually wind up in a conversation about the next year, and we usually want to try to give just a little bit more the next year than we did the year before. And last year, in 2018, it was in September, the engine on her car blew up. Like, it didn't really blow up, like it didn't, go into flames. But I basically had to pay to get her engine replaced, which is $9,000 of, not really expected. And so we were getting towards the end of the year, and we had paid for that and whatever. And she says, "Hey, we need to talk." And I don't like talking about money, by the way. I don't even like talking about money with her. And she says, "Hey, we need to talk." And I thought in my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, She's going to come back, because I had thought about this. I'm not going to lie to you. I thought, if I stopped giving to the church for a little bit, if I stopped giving back to the Lord for a little bit, I could recover some of that money. I mean, $9,000 is a lot of money. And so I thought she was going to come back, and that was going to be like the conversation, and we were going to both say it, but no, my wife, because she probably has way more faith than I do, she says, we just got to figure out how much more we're going to give next year than we did this year. And I wanted to go, are you not living in the same world that I'm living in right now? Like, did you not just pay this bill? But you know what? I mean, it's about learning to develop that discipline and not quitting when things get tough. Because when you keep seeing it through, you will keep seeing God do incredible things. Incredible things. So, what are you going to do with what you have? This is where we ended last week. This is where we're going to end this week. What are you going to do with what you have? And maybe collectively, you don't have to say it with me, but would this be the cry of your heart this week? What are you going to do? God has blessed us with more than we need. We are rich. We will not trust in riches, but we will trust in him who richly provides. And because we have more, we will give more and do more. Would this be the cry of our heart? That he has blessed us with more than we need. We are rich. We're not going to trust in what we have, but we are going to trust in him who has richly provided it. And because we have more, we will give more and do more. And I believe that as you and as I choose to live that way, we will see God do and accomplish more through us, through our ministry, through our work, because it's all about storing up those treasures in heaven. Listen, I'm going to ask if you guys to stand with me as we close our service. We're going to close in a word of prayer and sing this last song, and our prayer team is going to be in the back corner. So they're here to pray with you and for you and over you. I know some of you are dealing with some things that are difficult, and our prayer team just has this deep desire in their heart to put their arms around you and to listen and to talk and to pray with you over those things that you're facing and going through. Father, thank you for loving us and caring about us. God, thank you that, Lord, you're gracious enough to talk to us about money and finances and how we handle those things and take care of those things. And God, that you are inviting us to be part of something so much bigger than ourselves. So I pray that you would help every one of us to learn to be obedient, to steward our finances the way that you've told us that we should. And it's in Jesus' beautiful, matchless name we pray.